Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's a dark and creepy true story that not a lot of people know about? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Baby farming, not to be confused with baby farms on The Sims. It worked like modern-day daycare in a way. Desperate single and/or impoverished mothers would send their young children to homes while they tried to get back on their feet for a small fee. Most farmers would neglect the children to death or just instantly murder them. This was to save money on caring for the children and profit from selling the children's clothes and toys, and sometimes the bodies were sold. Imagine responding to a Facebook ad for affordable childcare. Seems perfect. Stately home in the countryside with lots of outdoor space to play, but then your child never comes home. Bela Kiss was a Hungarian serial killer in the early years of the 20th century. He murdered multiple women, at least 23, and pickled their bodies in barrels. His crimes were discovered while he was serving in the Austro-Hungarian army during World War I. He was nearly caught by the authorities, but he fled a military hospital, leaving a dead body in his bed, and disappeared without a trace. My stepmom and her twin brother were from the hills of eastern Kentucky, had a total of 9 kids in a poverty-stricken family. One day, the sheriff pulled up and the man picked her and her brother out of the 9, and they were adopted into a family in Cincinnati. Years later, the oldest found her and told her the story of how she was taken. Orphan Trains. Starting in the 1850s, trains loaded with orphans traveled from the eastern United States through the Midwest and into the West. The trains would stop in farming communities, and farmers who didn't have children could easily adopt from the cargo of children. However, the children were more often used for labor. The practice didn't cease till the 1930s, when cheap agricultural labor was no longer in demand. It's estimated some 200,000 orphaned, homeless, and destitute children were dispatched in this manner, though documentation wasn't precise. Professional wrestler Bruiser Br Ro was stabbed to death in a shower backstage by another wrestler. The man who committed the murder was acquitted, partly because key witnesses didn't receive their court summons until after the trial ended. Lived near to the rural Sea of Japan coast for a while. The local Japanese Coast Guard would repeatedly find small wooden boats full of dead bodies washed up from North Korea. They also used to tell us the beaches along the coast were famous for abductions. Returned hostages would tell stories of walking pets, etc. late at night on the coast, and then being taken to North Korea under cover of darkness. Abductions don't seem to have happened since the 90s, but the washed-up boat incidents continue. Big Nose George Parrot. Cliff Notes version here. Read the full story in the link. In 1878, Big Nose George Parrot and his gang attempted to derail a train with the intent to rob it east of Rawlins, Wyoming. After being foiled, the gang fled to a hideout near Elk Mountain. The Carbon County Sheriff and a Union Pacific detective approached the gang to apprehend them but were murdered. The gang then fled to Montana. After bragging about the attempted robbery and murders in a bar in Miles City, they were arrested and taken back to Rawlins, where they pled guilty in September of 1880. 10 days before he was to be hanged in April 1881, he escaped, but not without a kerfuffle. The noise attracted attention, and he was quickly overpowered by locals and lynched from a telegraph pole. The rope broke, and he lay in the dirt begging to be shot. The mob replaced the noose, and he was forced to climb a 12-foot ladder and step off while wearing his leg irons. He eventually choked to death with a mob of 200 watching. Here's where it gets weird. A doctor in town, John Osborne, and a Union Pacific surgeon, Thomas Magee, claimed the body. After making a death mask, Magee removed the top of Parrot's skull to study his brain. Osborne took the rest of the body. He gave the cap of the skull to his assistant, Lillian Heath, who went on to become Wyoming's first female doctor. It's been rumored to have been used as a doorstop and an ashtray. Osborne skinned the body and buried it in a whiskey barrel. He had the skin tanned and had the leather made into a medical bag and a pair of shoes. He wore the shoes the day he was inaugurated governor in 1893. In 1950, construction unearthed the barrel, and the skull cap matched the lower half, providing a positive ID. The mask, lower skull, and shoes are on display at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins. The skull cap is on display at the Union Pacific Museum in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Aaron Campbell, read at your own risk. Around 2018, then 16-year-old Aaron Campbell snuck into a home in hopes of stealing some pot. Instead, he found a 6-year-old child sleeping. Seeing this as an opportunity, he absconded with the child. Taking her to an abandoned hotel, he proceeded to violently then murder her. Later, when interviewed, he admitted that he felt satisfied with what he did. Additionally, he said that he had tried really hard not to start laughing during court proceedings. A sort of good ending to this is that he's currently one of the most hated people in Scotland, having to hide in a cell to avoid other prisoners. He was actually jumped and badly beaten by one inmate after his cell door was accidentally left open. It was so bad that he had to be taken to emergency care. The inmate is thought of as a hero for this. My ex-girlfriend had an uncle who was a pedo and was abusing his daughter, her cousin, and she got very sick. One, or more not sure, of her teachers at the school urged the parents to seek medical care for her because it seemed serious. The parents would not take her to the hospital because they knew the abuse would be discovered. Unsure of the details, but apparently she was very ill and her stomach was distended. She ended up dying. My ex-girlfriend was very young at the time, so she doesn't remember this well, but was told by other family members, I think. The father died at some point before I met her family, but I did meet the aunt. She didn't seem like a monster to me, but knowing she had let her husband abuse their daughter and then allowed her daughter to die to protect him is so utterly sickening. One of the creepier stories I've heard firsthand. Hinterk, a homicide case that occurred in Germany in 1922. The Gruber family, consisting of 6 members, lived on a remote farmstead. Over time, they had been experiencing strange and uncanny events, including footsteps in the attic, unfamiliar voices, and items disappearing and reappearing. One fateful evening, the family's maid quit, stating that the house was haunted. Disturbed by her departure, the Grubers started hearing strange sounds again. However, nothing could prepare them for what happened next. On March 31st, when neighbors hadn't seen any sign of life from the family for days, they decided to investigate. What they discovered was a gruesome scene. The entire Gruber family, including the maid and even the 2-year-old toddler, had been brutally murdered with a mattock, a type of agricultural tool. Shockingly, the bodies were found in the farmhouse piled on top of each other. Interestingly, the killer had fed the farm animals and remained on the property for a few days after the murders. The authorities were called to the scene, and over the years, various leads and theories emerged. However, the case remains unsolved to this day. With no known motive or identified culprit, Hinterk remains one of history's darkest and most perplexing mysteries, haunting the imaginations of those who encounter it. Well, as constant purveyors of our content here on this page, I am confident that our regular listeners are pretty well aware of Hinterk and the murders that took place there. A tragic and fascinating story. I wonder if it happened in the modern era. You think that murder might have been solved, but I'm afraid it's lost to time now. There is a recording of Jim Jones' speech during the night at Jonestown where the hundreds of people drank arsenic-laden juice and committed suicide. You can hear them dying in the background, and his sheer delirium is absolutely chilling. Also, the entire Jonestown incident is horrifying. There's a really good documentary about it on Netflix called Witness to Jonestown. Highly recommend. During World War II, an American airplane crashed near the Japanese island of Chichijima. There were 9 servicemen on board. One was rescued by an American submarine. The other 8 were taken in by the Japanese. Don't want to go into all the details, but through some time and events, the Japanese ended up eating those servicemen. But that's not the weird part. The one serviceman who was rescued, that was George H.W. Bush. PanAm Flight 759 was a regularly scheduled domestic passenger flight from Miami to San Diego, with stops in New Orleans and Las Vegas. On July 9, 1982, the Boeing 727 flying this route crashed in the New Orleans suburb of Kenner after being forced down by a microburst shortly after takeoff. The plane cartwheeled right into a subdivision. Everyone, 145 people on the plane died. 8 people on the ground died as well. I think a lot of people may know about this one, but the station Nightclub fire. Great White was playing a show at a small venue in Rhode Island. Pyrotechnics during the show caused the insulation foam on fire, and the entire place ignited and filled with thick black smoke very quickly. I believe there were a few exits, but many headed for the main entrance, causing a crowd crush and blocking others from escaping. By then, the smoke was too thick, and victims were either trampled, suffocated from smoke inhalation, or burned alive. The Neopets maniacs from the 2000s. They were known for the 3 guys, 1 hammer. They recorded some of their murders while laughing about it. In total, they killed 21 people. It also came as a shock and challenged the common perception because they were young and from well-off families. The Tuskegee Study on syphilis. Starting in the 1930s, the U.S. government recruited black men in Macon County with syphilis to see long-term effects of the disease. Black men were recruited, obvious racism, because they were believed to be prone to STDs and never want to get treated. It was intended to last 6 months, but went on for years. Government officials told the participants they were being treated, but they never were. In fact, the researchers also enlisted medical staff from other hospitals to not treat the participants, as well as having participants discharged from the military so they wouldn't be treated. In 1947, penicillin became the standard and effective treatment for syphilis. However, U.S. government researchers continued to keep almost 400 infected men from being treated who already thought they were being treated. This continued until 1972, when Peter Buxton leaked what was going on and resulted in the study being ended. By this time, 128 participants died from syphilis, while many of their partners and kids were infected. This has resulted in a deep distrust from minority communities to participate in research. This study, along with many others, have used these populations as guinea pigs to lethal consequences. The myth isn't true, but what caused is creepy and up for debate. A while ago in St. Louis, there were experiments with chemicals done without the public knowing about. People in hazmat suits would be on top of buildings at the crack of dawn, spraying and testing items near a high-density population area, and didn't tell the citizens. The residents claimed that it caused mutations, giving some birth to one version of the bubblehead STL myths, and hurt their children, while the government says it didn't. Search up St. Louis chemical experiments and you'll probably find it. It's just creepy to think from the people's perspective. It's almost like your own government was testing possible weapons on you and your family.